Welcome, firefighters. Thank you for joining us today for an incredible and timely show where we'll explore the growing threats to our oceans and the seafloor, which is deep sea mining and our once-in-a-generation opportunity to stop an entire destructive industry before it even starts. That's unusual, but we can do it. This is a new topic for Fire Drill Fridays, but I can't wait to dive in and learn more. Listen, please drop your name and where you're joining from in the comments. Will you do that? Because I love hearing from you and knowing where you are and who you are. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family. We're glad you're here. We're building community. That's what we're doing. And we're learning about the climate crisis and we're taking action to address it. You can see lots of ways to take action and get involved at firedrillfridays.com/take-action. Now, before we get into our topic, let's start with some seriously good news. It's been a while. First, some good news from Connecticut, because the latest state to ban state utility companies from making their customers, us, pay for their lobbying efforts. I bet you didn't know they were doing that. In Connecticut, utilities spend more in lobbying than any other sector, actively opposing policies that expand local renewable energy and rooftop solar. Well, the state, Connecticut, joined Maine and Colorado, where similar bans were passed this year. This is a growing movement to stop utilities from using our dollars to fight climate action. So cheers to Connecticut, Maine, and Colorado, standing up to climate obstructionists, and hopefully there'll be many more to come. I also have a sliver of good news out of the Supreme Court of all places. On June 15th, the court upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act, which establishes guidelines for the foster care and adoption of Native American children by giving preference for them to be placed with their own tribes and relatives. The law was put into place in 1978. After a congressional investigation found that between 1950s and 1970s, about a third of all Native American children had been taken from their homes and given to non-Indigenous families with no connection to their tribe and culture. This was an issue that we delved into in our Fire Drill Friday show. I think it was last November during Native American Heritage Month. I am really thrilled that the courts sided on the right side of history in this one particular case. The upholding of this law is a huge win for Indigenous families, tribes, and tribal sovereignty. Of course, I can't mention this good news without also talking about the incredibly bad news coming out of the Supreme Court, especially last Friday's ruling to strike down affirmative action in college admissions. This ruling is deeply disappointing and a huge setback to equity in the United States. You know, affirmative action has been an effective tool in increasing opportunity across races, ethnicities, classes, and other identities that suffer the legacy of deep historical inequities. In particular, equitable access to education is critical for young people who are the future of our movement and the next generation of environmental leaders. In these times, it is more important than ever that we take anti-racist action. You know, color blindness, pretending that race doesn't matter, reinforces the long-standing structural advantages that have benefited white people like me at the expense of everyone else. And that's exactly what the courts just did. This is such an important reminder for all of us to do the extra work in our own lives to confront racial prejudice in our schools, our workplaces, and in the environmental movement. Diversity and equity benefit all of us, and a diverse and inclusive movement is simply a smarter and more powerful one, and ultimately more successful, by the way. So on that note, let's get back to protecting the deep sea. Okay, so listen, imagine with me, you're thousands of feet below the surface in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of feet down there. Temperatures are freezing and there is no sunlight. It's silent. Life has been evolving slowly for millions and millions of years, relatively untouched by human activity. Many of the diverse species in these deep waters can be found nowhere else on Earth. They look strange to us. They have names like ghost octopus and yeti crab and barrel-eye fish. Scientists have discovered more than 5,000 new species in the deep sea, and each expedition yields more discoveries. We currently know more about the moon than the ocean floor. I mean, isn't that amazing? Now imagine gigantic machines weighing more than 300 tons, larger and heavier than a blue whale, being lowered to the bottom of the ocean. These tank-like machines are scooping and dredging or cutting parts of the ocean's deep seabed to extract nickel or cobalt. Imagine the suffocating clouds of particles, the sudden noise and light in an ecosystem that's always been silent and dark. What if this would happen? This is what would happen if deep sea mining is ever allowed to start. Okay, a handful of companies looking to make extraordinary profits at the expense of our planet are gearing up to start mining at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Wondrous species that we're only beginning to understand could be lost forever. Carbon sinks and storage, including methane trapped in the ocean floor, could be disturbed and potentially released. Fisheries and coral reefs that are central to Pacific communities' way of life could be threatened. Deep sea mining companies don't have permission from governments to start mining yet, but they are using every trick in the book to convince the so-called regulator, the International Seabed Authority, to give them the go-ahead later this month. We have to stop this industry before it ever starts, okay? We have to do it by protecting the largest ecosystem on the planet and facing down the newest front line of corporate greed, putting profits over people and our planet. For the past decade, resistance to deep sea mining has been led by people of the Pacific Ocean, known as Tagata o La Moana, who are joined by scientists and civil society organizations in fighting this new industry. Plus, more and more governments are now publicly committing to prevent the seabed chaos from even starting. This month, government representatives are coming together for critical negotiations on whether or not to greenlight this industry. So we need to make some noise, loud noise, for the health of our oceans. Take a moment now, go to firedrillfridays.com/takeaction and urge the Biden administration to ban deep sea mining. Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to tell you that we are joined today by two incredible ocean advocates, Arlo Hemphill and James Hita, who will explain how we can hold world leaders accountable to ocean protection and take back control of the debate from the mining industry. Arlo is the Ocean Sanctuaries and Stop Deep Sea Mining project lead with Greenpeace USA. He's a marine biologist, an explorer, and conservationist. Arlo has been working on ocean science, policy, and communications for over 20 years. He represented Greenpeace US in the campaign that successfully established a UN Global Oceans Treaty in March of this year, which is where I got to know him. James Hita is the Seabed Mining Campaigner at Peacetree Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand. James joined Greenpeace to stand against the new and dangerous seabed mining industry. It's a reality that hits home for him, as he knows that the lives and livelihoods of Pacific people are being put at risk once again by extractive industries in the name of profit. So I'm so happy and honored to welcome Arlo and James.
So good to see you, Jane.
Thanks for joining me. Before we dive into the issue at hand, I'd love to hear from each of you. How did you get involved in the fight to protect our oceans? You know, this is an issue that is really close to my heart. I grew up on the beaches of Santa Monica and have always felt an all-encompassing reverence for the ocean and its magnificent creatures and coral reefs. And you know, I've snorkeled over the Great Barrier Reef and in the Galapagos, and I've swum with all kinds of sea creatures. I love the ocean, and I'm so curious to hear, how did this issue capture your heart? Let's start with you, Arlo.
Sure. Like you, I grew up on the beaches of the US, only the other side of the country, on the East Coast beaches. And I spent my childhood scavenging the shoreline for crabs and eels, and was just fascinated with everything about the ocean, about marine life. And I wanted to be a marine biologist. It was the only thing I ever wanted to be. So I went to school for that. And when I went to school for that, I began to learning about the unraveling of the planet, all the things that we're doing to it. And having gone to school in South Florida, I had firsthand observation of the coral reefs down there that were already dead at the time that I was in college. The corals are pretty much dead. And then hearing about the destruction of the rainforest and the climate issue was just emerging in the news at that time, that I just felt like I can't spend my life looking under a microscope and counting scales on fish when all this is happening around me, that I needed to join the fight. And that's how I got involved in ocean conservation and eventually to Greenpeace.
Well, we're very grateful for that transition. I appreciate it. I really identify with it too. How about you, James?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to not have a really deep affinity and connection with the ocean. You know, we're surrounded by it. You know, every morning I start my day with a walk, and that's down to the Manukau Harbour. So I get that really deep connection to the ocean every single day, which is really beautiful. But you know, being a person of the Pacific, Tangadole Moana, we have this deep connection and spirituality surrounding the ocean. And we have this understanding through our myths and legends and stories that we learn growing up, that we have to, you know, see the ocean as a living being, as a god in its own right, and you know, looking after the ocean, protecting it from threats such as deep sea mining, just fits so well within that lifestyle, that belief and that worldview. So you know, I've always had that deep connection to it. But really what has brought me here is activism, being active, being civically active, participating in society and fighting for a better future, not just for us, but to be good ancestors for our future generations.
Does doing that help you not get depressed, not sink into despair?
Absolutely. You know, if we just take the world as it is, you know, it could be seen to be a rather sad place sometimes. But getting out there, building community, as you said, Jane, and being a part of the world and doing something to make positive change really feeds that fire.
Yeah, I identify with you there. Thanks. Arlo, what are the biggest concerns you have about deep sea mining and how it could affect our marine ecosystems and the overall health of our oceans?
My biggest concern is that we're about to go invade and literally destroy pretty much the last untouched wilderness on the planet. It's the last place that humans haven't reached to go and extract and destroy and use for their own purposes. And the thing that's the most scary about it is how little we know. We don't have nearly enough information about what lives down there, how it drives the carbon cycle, how it drives other cycles that lead to fisheries for people across the Pacific, for oxygen circulation, everything. Every time scientists go down there, every single time, they're finding new species. These species are brand new to science, and the scale of what we're talking about is enormous. The International Seabed Authority that you mentioned previously has already issued licenses for exploration, for deep sea mining, that is the size of Canada. The license areas together is the size of Canada. And that's just for exploration. The industry hasn't even started yet. And so the cumulative impacts that we're looking at, and probably the most compelling thing in my mind is that unlike chopping down a forest somewhere, and the forest will eventually grow back, maybe be 80 years, maybe be 200 years, these ecosystems will never recover in human timescales. Once we destroy them, they will never return while humans are still on the planet. The rate of growth and of ecological restoration down there is just way too slow for us to ever get this back should we decide we made a mistake.
Wow. Well, boy, thank you for that sobering thought. And James, what about the effect on people? I'd love to hear from you how the lives and livelihoods of people of the Pacific and beyond, how could that be affected by deep sea mining?
Yeah, I think quite often we hear in the environmental movement this thing around, Pacific communities being at the front line of the impacts. And I really just want to send a message home to all of the viewers about what the realities of that is. In one of the nations that I am extremely closely connected to, the Cook Islands, our families on islands such as Rarotonga and Mangaia and Atasaki, they rely on the ocean for food, and we're talking every day. You run out and you catch your fish for that evening's dinner, and it's far too expensive to go to the supermarket, down to the shops to buy food, just because of the remote nature of these islands. So that really is the front line. And if we devastate fish stocks, that source of food is completely gone. But at the same time, Pacific communities are already facing issues like the climate crisis, as you'll know very well. People are losing their homes, their islands. They're losing beachfronts that are just being absorbed by the ocean. It's a really sad thing. And there's this power dynamic across the Pacific as well, where we're still facing the impacts of colonization years and years and years later, nuclear fallout, we're still facing that. So this is yet another layer of impact from companies seeking profit coming into the Pacific region and taking so much from it.
And what about the narrative that the mining industry is touting, that deep sea mining is critical to the transition to clean energy? James, can you tell us if there's any truth to that?
I think the very first thing I'd say to that is just to take everything the mining industry says with a grain of salt. Understand that these are people who are set to, if the industry is allowed to go ahead, make billions of dollars of profit potentially. And very little, an extremely tiny amount. We're talking, 0.00x% of money made from deep sea mining actually going to communities who they're saying it will benefit, like those in the Pacific Islands. So, that's one of the first factors. And really, if we look at it across the board, deep sea mining won't close a single land-based mine. Deep sea mining won't actually change that structure of the relationship that we have with the planet continuously extracting. What we really need to do to protect the future, protect the oceans, protect our feeding of the lands, is change the relationship we hold with the planet. Stop taking so much from it and actually think about what we've already taken and keep that cycle going.
Yes, we have totally lost the concept of us being connected to nature, of the interdependence between humans and nature. We have to get that back. So who exactly decides whether this deep sea mining industry is allowed to operate? I mean, the International Seabed Authority, what is that? I never heard of that. And I doubt many of our viewers have either. Arlo, can you explain to us who they are and how this decision is going to be made?
Sure. So the International Seabed Authority was established by the UN Law of the Sea and its 1994 implementing agreement, this other add-on rule that created this agency and gave it jurisdiction over what is literally the surface of 42% of the planet. In one way, it's more powerful than any other agency in the world. I mean, imagine having the first say over 42% of the planet. And until a few years ago, no one had ever even heard of them. They are based in Kingston, Jamaica, and for probably the first 15 so years of their existence, it was very quiet, countries coming together, talking about the future of the deep sea, not making very much progress in the direction of mining or really anything else for that matter. And they were overlooked by society. But in the end, they have that jurisdiction. The countries of the world have given them that power. In recent years, there's been new leadership at the International Seabed Authority that came in with a different mindset, that rather than moving slowly and thinking through things cautiously, let's launch the world's newest extractive industry and become famous for our careers for having accomplished that. And they basically lit a fire under countries to get them really thinking about the rules and regulations and getting them done so that the deep sea mining industry could start. The one thing that needs to happen before deep sea mining can start is, well, by law, what needs to happen is countries need to agree on a full body of regulations that covers everything from the environmental impact to how the money will be dispersed to processing and everything in between. Countries are still quite a few years off from agreeing on those regulations. But what we're dealing with now is one mining company who's very well off and probably the biggest greenwasher out there, basically kind of pulled the rug out from everyone by working with a small Pacific nation and convincing them to trigger this thing called the 2-year rule. It's a loophole in international law that says if any country comes forward and claims a desire to want to begin mining, then the rest of the world has 2 years to get their act together and get the regulations done. We're hitting that rule today. And so what happens after today is a big mystery in everyone's minds, because there's this enormous legal debate among lawyers about whether mining could actually start now, because we're out of time. The 2-year rule triggered today, but the mining code is not done. The regulations are not completed. So it's really your guess is as good as mine. What's going to happen in the next few weeks at this meeting that's starting in Kingston on Monday?
Well, we got a big win for oceans this year, right? With the Global Ocean Treaty, Arlo. Can you tell us what happened and how the momentum of this win can be carried forward into deep sea mining fight? I mean, I thought that the Global Oceans Treaty created a legal framework to protect the deep seas and not just the 200 miles off the coast.
Yes. So this is probably the biggest environmental win of our lifetimes. Countries have been negotiating for almost 20 years for some kind of framework to protect international waters. That's the 42% of the oceans that I was talking about. And it's not just the deep sea, it's the entire water column, it's the surface, and it's everything that lives in it, has been under negotiation. Before this, there was no rules. It was the Wild West, completely no rules. There was no way that you could go and create measures to protect habitat for whales or habitat for sea turtles, or say, this area of deep sea corals is so special to humanity, we need to put it aside and protect it like we do Yosemite and Yellowstone. There was no way to do that. This new Global Ocean Treaty, which you were there when countries came together and agreed, provides that. A couple problems is that it was just adopted. So Greenpeace went back on June 19th and witnessed the adoption where countries legally brought it into being. And now it has to go back to all the capitals of the world, be signed and ratified by at least 60 different countries. We have the numbers, it's going to happen, but like everything in politics, it's going to take a year or two to have put all these pieces in a row so that the treaty actually comes into force, that it becomes world law, so to speak.
A year or two, you said?
Yes.
Wow.
Between countries having to ratify and then create a structure. They need to create a basically a new body that will govern this treaty. And so all that is going to take a year, 18 months, somewhere in that time frame, as long as we keep pressure on our governments that they need to sign and ratify as quickly as possible. How it's going to impact deep sea mining is probably the biggest thing in it that will affect what's happening now. Is there's a whole section on the treaty on environmental impact assessments. And the United States in particular has extremely strong standards for environmental impact assessments in the ocean. And they fought tooth or nail for these provisions in the treaty to be as strong as possible. And they are stronger than what the International Seabed Authority currently asks mining companies to do when they're going out to explore for mining. So this will put all countries on a higher standard for environmental impact assessments. And we're already seeing in the March meeting of the International Seabed Authority, we're already seeing countries come to the table saying, hey, we need to negotiate a little differently here now. We have new responsibilities in the new treaty. So we can't just talk about exploitation without also talking about conservation and the environment. So we're already seeing a complete change in the narrative just because people are aware that this treaty is coming into force soon.
So the fact that it could be a year or two, are they trying to get in under the deadline and get mining approved before everything has been ratified and signed off on? The mining companies are definitely doing that 100%. That's their main strategy. And they have a few country allies that also talk that way. There are a handful of countries, very small number of countries, who will say things like, the new treaty isn't in force yet, we shouldn't take consideration of that. The majority of countries are not saying that, but there are a handful that do talk that way. Okay. From your perspective, James, what other strategies have been successful so far in building momentum to stop deep sea mining before it starts?
I think one of the best things is to center the frontline communities that we're working with at the heart of the issue. You know, we're talking about people who live in very remote places and don't have easy connection to, you know, the internet, even sometimes, which is quite difficult to get that message out to, you know, protect the Pacific Ocean, to protect their livelihoods and ways of life. So I think one of the best ways is for us as Greenpeace, as an international network, the environmental movement, is to share that message. You know, make this response equitable, as you've said, Jane, and get the message from Pacific people out to the world, because it's very hard to ignore once you hear it firsthand like that. You know, these are people's everyday lives, their homes, their lands, their islands that are at stake. You know, it's really important for the rest of the world to stand up as well. You know, we can't have frontline communities doing all of the work. It's really important that we, you know, who are in a privileged position to be able to take action, to be able to, you know, take a moment out of our days to do that. But, you know, it's really about delivering a united front. And that's one of the things that we're doing. You know, the International Seabed Authority has been this space that's really been very technical. It's been, you know, void of any actual political debate around the issue. And, you know, beginning earlier this year, we facilitated getting Pacific people who don't have a seat at that table from civil society, not governments, to be in that space, to raise the issue of heritage, cultural heritage, the stuff that we can't touch, but we understand represents that really deep connection to the ocean. So, you know, that completely changed this debate. It actually brought it into perspective, and actually, you know, people in that room started to think, oh, this isn't just about resources and minerals and money and economics. It's people's lives and livelihoods. So that's been one of the ways we're trying to shift that conversation.
Okay, finally, Arlo, my last question for you. How can you tell us how our Fire Drill Fridays firefighters out there who are listening, how can we get involved in the movement against deep sea mining and really make a meaningful impact?
the biggest thing that you can do, because it is out in the ocean, is contact your political leaders. Contact your local leaders, contact your state leaders, contact the President of the United States. There's going to be new legislation introduced to Congress very shortly this summer that will propose to ban deep sea mining in U.S. waters. And Greenpeace has a petition that everyone here can sign. It's on Fire. You have the link on Fire Drill Fridays, asking Biden to ban deep sea mining in the United States, but also take a position internationally that we don't want to see it anywhere, and that we won't open our ports to it. We won't open our markets to it. And so please reach out to all your decision makers, but particularly at this moment, the Biden administration. Equally, if you're watching from another country, we have petitions directed to all over the world. James has a petition in New Zealand. And so wherever you're dialing in from, you please, all countries matter here. Every country has a say in international processes. So please reach out to your political leaders.
So signing the petition is of particular importance right now?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me, you said local leaders as well. Just real quickly, say why local leaders could be important in this issue.
Well, because local leaders are going to affect national legislation. So, for example, it's Representative Case of Hawaii, who is introducing this new body of legislation for deep sea mining. But we need all the other representatives and all the other senators to vote positively for that, to co-sponsor it, to champion it. So your state legislators is really important for making Congress move on this.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to have our firefighters ask questions. If you have any questions out there, my wonderful firefighters, for Arlo or James or me for that matter, drop them in the comments or from wherever you're watching. Okay. Maddie?
Yes, we have so many great questions coming in. People are really, really curious about this issue. I'll sort of start from the beginning. I know this was mentioned at the start of the call, but this is a question from Andrew on YouTube for either one of you. What exactly is it that the companies are mining for in deep sea mining?
Great question.
James, you want?
Yeah, I think there's a number of minerals and metals that they're looking for: manganese, cobalt, nickel, lithium, and one of the biggest arguments has been touted that it needs to shift the green energy transition. But what we actually see is they're talking about critical minerals and metals, and talking about metal security. So that's very different from nation to nation, but it doesn't always mean the green energy transition as well. So I just encourage viewers to look into what that is. But we're seeing a shift in the green transition to looking for ways to not even have to look for continuous sources of new resources. And that's what I think we should really be focused on, is providing the environment for that innovation to happen. If there is a lack of resources, historically in the history of humankind, we've looked for new ways of working, new ways of being, new ways of living with the world. And I think, if we just continuously look for new sources, we're going to continue that cycle of extraction. So if we leave the seabed alone, if we protect it and ban deep sea mining, it will actually foster that environment of innovation to ensure that the green energy transition isn't just for the climate movement, but is a just and equitable transition for the entire planet.
Hear, hear. Arlo, do you want to add anything to that?
So a number of everything that James said, I completely agree with. A number of the main drivers that they're looking for right now are manganese, nickel, and copper, and cobalt. And these metals have applications in technology. They do have applications in renewable energy, although the deep sea is not the only source that we have for them. But they're also very important in military applications. So in many cases, while the mining companies want us to think about the green transition because that's in the forefront of everybody's mind with the climate crisis. A lot of times what they're really doing is looking to supply the military industrial complex with war machines. And so that's another reason why we shouldn't be fooled by this. And we need to look at where the metals are actually going and what they're actually being used for. And as James points out, we need to invest with everything we have in recycling and recovering every bit of these metals so that we reduce the need to having to extract them from the earth.
Thank you very much. Maddie, I know there are more questions.
We have many. From Jana on Facebook, does deep sea mining have any impact on earthquakes? It sounds very scary to a coastal Californian.
Who can answer that? Arlo, James?
So that's a difficult question. There's a couple different types of deep sea mining. The one that we're looking at in the Central Pacific that has an area the size of Canada that's already licensed out will basically shear the surface off. It will basically scrape the surface to take minerals that are sitting right on the top. There are several other types of deep sea mining that are much more invasive and more similar to, say, mountaintop removal. There was a case in Papua New Guinea in a very geologically active volcanic region where they wanted to do this more invasive type just miles off the homes of coastal villages. Whether that would be able to trigger an earthquake or not is probably a little bit outside of my expertise, but I wouldn't be digging around in that kind of environment myself.
Thank you, Arlo. The next question we have is for James. This is from Kennedy on Facebook. And Kennedy says, this can be for coastal communities at large, but especially Pacific Islanders. What are the dangers they are facing if deep sea mining were to go through? Is there any regard by these companies about the negative impacts that this would bring?
Wow. Hi, Kennedy. Good to hear from you. I'm going to hand that question over to James. I think he's in a better position to answer. What do you think?
It's really difficult. As I spoke about earlier, this is everyday people's lives. It's their access to food. We had a case here and we're still fighting it here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where a mining company is looking to mine an area called off the coast of Taranaki. Patia shoals, that's a traditional source for kaimoana, food of the ocean. So there are shellfish there are pygmy blue whales, there are Hector's dolphins, which are an endangered species. We're fighting so hard to protect these things, whilst at the same time, my people, other people around the Pacific are fighting everyday injustices. In Aotearoa, my people are incarcerated significantly more than the Pākehā or white Caucasian people in Aotearoa. So it's a really difficult situation where, we're fighting to survive, and at the same time, we're needing to fight this additional industry. So on the front line, it actually means, losing food, not being able to feed your family.
Pretty dire.
Thank you, James. The next question we have is from Trisha on Facebook. This is for either of you. Which countries are the most influential when it comes to deep sea mining, and how much authority does the US have in the room where decisions are being made?
James?
Yeah, I think, what we've seen so far is that there's this building movement across the Pacific, which I'm really proud of. We've got countries like New Zealand standing up and saying, actually, we need to follow a precautionary approach backed by robust science. And, we need to make sure that we won't cause harm to the marine environment, to the deep seabed. And I think that's a really good position to hold. And we're seeing that taking over the Pacific and that movement growing. What we're asking for in this side of the world, at least, is for Australia to join that call. And Australia would be a really significant, addition to that. New Zealand's already on side. We've got countries in the Pacific, joining that movement, but Australia is the next big step. So, if we you have any Australians here, please contact your government.
Arlo, anything to add?
Yeah, the way that the International Seabed Authority is structured is all the countries of the world that are signed on to the UN Law of the Sea are part of the assembly. And then there's a smaller group of countries that make up the council. And the council is the body that actually goes through and are making these rules and are negotiating the rules line by line. So I would say that set of countries, and there's a list of it on the International Seabed Authority. I wouldn't point out a particular country as being more influential than another per se. The Pacific, for example, have a very strong bloc, but then obviously with economic and political interest, the EU has a lot of power. So it's all pretty much as you would imagine from global geopolitics, but it's the council, the smaller body of countries, that has the most power. The United States is in this very bizarre position where they have never ratified the UN Law of the Sea. So they participate in the assembly and the council, but as an observer. So they act like they're a member. They speak their opinions. They provide input on all the rules, but they're not an official voting member of the council because of not having ratified the UN Law of the Sea. But I would say that aspect of them not having the influence of that being an actual voting member is more than outweighed by the fact of their economics and that so many of the companies are based there, so many of the markets are there. And so what the US says and does in that space has a lot of power despite it not being voting power.
Thank you both.
Should we as activists try to put pressure on the government, our government, to ratify those laws that they've never done so that they will be a voting member, or is that not at the top of the list of things we have to worry about right now?
Let's get the US to ratify the new Global Ocean Treaty first and foremost, and then we'll worry about the Law of the Sea, because that's been sitting on the back shelf for decades now.
Okay, thanks. Thank you both. Maddie, another question, please.
Yes, perfect segue for that. Thank you, Arlo. So this is a question from William in Brooklyn on Facebook for either one of you. How are treaties like the Oceans Treaty or a ban on deep sea mining actually enforced? What happens if these types of agreements are violated?
Arlo?
Oh, sure. They're basically enforced by mutual agreement. So every country makes a commitment that they're going to abide by this. And particularly when you take it and you ratify it in your country, that's the process of turning it into national law, so to speak. And so the individual countries are responsible for enforcing it on entities that are coming from their countries. If a country were to blatantly disregard it and just completely ignore what the treaty says, then there would be political consequences. They would be ostracized in other political forum. You would have things like embargoes and the kind of things that you've seen in the past with Cuba and with the Russian oligarchs when the war broke out in Ukraine. Those types of similar measures would happen if there was an overtly bad player in any treaty like this.
Thank you, Arlo. Maddie?
So the next question, Jane, I'm sort of turning it back to you. This is a question from Layla on YouTube, and she says, does Jane or anyone else have any advice for anyone who wants to help, but because of their young age doesn't have much control?
Well, there's on the Fire Drill Friday website, there's the petition that you can sign that we've been talking about. Arlo, do you have any other ideas?
I think young people have way more power than they give themselves credit for. I think a young person writing a heartfelt letter to political leadership, drawing a picture of their favorite sea animals, asking to speak on the phone with somebody at the State Department or with their local senator of your district. Senators pick up the phone for those kind of people. Political leaders are excited to see young people, especially from their district, take action. And your age shouldn't make you feel like you don't have a say and that your say isn't important. It's as important as anyone else's. And in fact, look at the Fridays for the Future and people like Greta. they move the narrative and the conversation on climate way more than anyone who is older and more established and has this kind of job or whatever could ever do in a million years. So never deny your power. Just pick up the phone and speak your mind, and let leaders know that you're concerned about these things.
And just remember, it's your future that we older people, or rather the fossil fuel industry, is trying to steal from you. It's your future that you're trying to reclaim. You have every right in the world to be angry and to make demands to protect your future. Thank you very much for the question. Maddie, I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice. It looks like we have quite a few young viewers on for this episode. So this question is from Mike on Facebook. And he says, I'm listening to this show with my son, and he wants to know what he needs to do to become just like you, James and Arlo. Do you have any advice for him?
I wonder maybe if I can answer the last question and this question together. I became an activist at 14. I was on the front lines of fighting gentrified housing. So, demolishing lower income people's homes to provide homes for the wealthy. And, that was a cause that I got behind wholeheartedly, and I built community around, and I formed connections and networks. So, I think to all of the young people watching this show, as Arlo has said, your voice matters. It doesn't matter what number you put down on a piece of paper. In fact, it matters what words you say. It matters what you learn, what you understand, and how you help move us forward, how you help protect the world that we live in whatever way impassions you. There's a huge positive impact that we get from young people. Here in Aotearoa, we have the Make It 16 movement, where we're actively, calling on our system to be changed to allow 16 and up to vote for politicians, because our young people are so active. And our Supreme Court even, agreed with that, that it's a human rights failure to not allow younger people to vote. So get out there, have your voice heard, make submissions to your government representatives, talk to your friends and family about an issue that, might not be really exciting to some, but you can make it exciting. You can talk about it and be a part of that movement and foster those connections and community.
That's great, James. Thank you. Maddie?
Yeah, Arlo, I wanted to jump in. Do you have any advice, Arlo, for our young viewer who is hoping to become just like you and James?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll speak to career paths, since James already covered the do it now part, which is so important. There's really so many different paths that you can take to join a place like Greenpeace or one of our sister organizations around the world. I used to think as a kid, when I was a kid, that you had to be a scientist, that was the only way that you could go and have a say on anything that involved whales or sea turtles, that was the pathway. When I actually got into the world, I found that the scientists are a very small number of the people that actually work for an organization like Greenpeace. We do have scientists. I'm a former scientist. My boss is a former scientist, and there's a science unit. But there's an overwhelmingly more number of people that come from backgrounds in communications, lawyers, people who study accounting, people who study marketing. It's really almost anything that you're interested in, that you have a passion for. You can apply that towards the environmental movement and make a difference in your career. If you want a career in this, there's a way to channel art and acting and anything that you have a passion for. You can bring that and make it of use and make it part of the movement and be a valuable player in that. You don't have to come from you don't have to study one particular thing in school.
Beautiful answer. So true. Thank you, Arlo. Maddie, you have one more question?
Yeah, we do. And thank you both. That was so great. From Tanya on Facebook, we have a lot of very concerned people tuning in, wondering about the impacts of deep sea mining if it passes and if it goes through. So a few like this one, but from Tanya on Facebook, How would environmental harm from deep sea mining by corporations actually be monitored or assessed on the high seas?
I think
Arlo?
from what I've seen, it's really up to companies themselves to monitor, and what that looks like is really vague at the moment. And this regulator, the International Seabed Authority, would set down those rules. So what we're saying is, there's very little chance of actively monitoring every single impact of what deep sea mining might have on the environment. So it's really hard to even allow us to get to that stage and say that it might be safe. What we're saying is actually there's no need. There's no need for deep sea mining. We shouldn't even go down that pathway. And we're at that crossroads right now where we as the world can go down one pathway or another. And what we're saying to the entire world is that we need to stand together and make sure that we go down that safe pathway, that we change the way that we think about the planet. But we're talking about environmental impacts such as noise and vibrations, radioactivity, toxicity, sediment plumes that smother sea life for potentially hundreds of kilometers. So we're talking about distinctly changing one of the biggest and most untouched environments and ecosystems on the entire planet.
Thank you, James. And thank you both, Arlo and James. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really interesting. It was informative and inspiring, and this is a big deal, this issue that we have to really get active on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's very unusual to be alive at the exact moment in time when you can stop an entire extractive industry from destroying the environment before it even starts. That opportunity doesn't come along very often. And if we win, and we have to win, generations so far into the future will look back and thank us for our actions, right? So we have to act. You know the drill, firefighters. To make change, you got to take action. Together, we can stop an industry from gaining foothold and ravishing one of our last biodiverse havens on the planet. So you go to firedrillfriday.com/take action to sign the petition urging the Biden administration to stand alone, to stand strong against deep sea mining. firedrillfridays.com/take action. Sign the petition. We can stop this and protect the precious and unique ecosystems of the deep sea. If we raise our voices, they can't ignore us. So please take a moment now to go to firedrillfridays.com/take action and add your voice. And save the date for our next Fire Drill Fridays on the first Friday of the month, as always, August 4th. We're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at the climate justice movement in California and discuss why actions on climate change in this golden state matter to each and every one of us, no matter where we live. It's really important. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.